When hope vanished, a human war armada emerges from the void. In a universe where darkness consumed all, and hope was but a distant memory, humanity's greatest weapon lay dormant, hidden in the void. But now, as the stars flicker with the last remnants of life, a force unlike any other awakens. This is no ordinary army. This is humanity's final stand. When all seemed lost, they will rise. Are you ready for the war that will decide the fate of the galaxy? The last light of Andromeda. The dying screams of 1,000 starships echoed through subspace as Commander Sylar pressed her four-fingered hand against the command console. Her iridescent skin, normally a vibrant blue-green, had faded to the color of deep ocean waters in despair. The Zephyrian Empire, which had stood for 12,000 years, was falling in a single day. She stood on the bridge of the Stellar Dawn, one of the last operational dreadnoughts in what had once been the proudest fleet in the Andromeda galaxy. Through the crystalline viewports, she watched as the Void Hunters systematically dismantled their defense line. The enemy ships moved like predators through the darkness, their black hulls absorbing light itself, making them appear as moving wounds in the fabric of space. The Void Hunters had appeared 3 years ago from the empty spaces between galactic superclusters. No one knew where they originated or what they wanted beyond consumption. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't accept surrender. They simply harvested entire star systems, breaking down matter at the quantum level to fuel their endless expansion. Lieutenant Voss approached her, his crystalline eyes reflecting the explosions outside. The young officer's wings, a mark of his aerial ancestry, trembled with barely contained fear. "Commander, the Emperor's flagship has gone dark. We've lost contact with 70% of our remaining forces." Sylar closed her middle eye, a gesture of acknowledgement among her people. The mathematics were simple and cruel. They had started this battle with 8,000 ships. Now fewer than 200 remained operational. The Void Hunters had brought 50,000 vessels, each one a perfect killing machine that adapted to every weapon, learned from every tactic. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the archives station," called out Communications Officer Tarek from his position. His voice carried the mechanical undertone of the synthesis race, beings who had long ago merged organic consciousness with quantum processors. The main screen flickered to life, showing the ancient face of Keeper Alzar. The elderly Zephyrian's skin had turned completely gray, a sign of extreme age and wisdom among their species. Behind him, Sylar could see the vast crystalline data cores that contained the accumulated knowledge of 100 civilizations. "Commander Sylar," the Keeper began, his voice carrying urgency despite its frailness. "Our deep space sensors have detected something unprecedented. Massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the local group, in the void between Andromeda and the distant galaxies." Sylar felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in days. Not quite hope, but curiosity. The void between galaxies was supposed to be empty, containing nothing but scattered hydrogen atoms and dark matter. What kind of distortions? The kind that suggest objects of enormous mass moving through space that should be empty. The readings indicate thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of objects, each one the size of our largest battleships or bigger. Before Sylar could respond, new alarms began screaming across the bridge. The tactical display updated, showing Void Hunter formations moving to encircle their position. They had minutes, perhaps less, before the enemy's main force arrived. She turned to her crew, these brave souls who had chosen to stand with her even as their empire crumbled. Each face showed the same mixture of fear and determination. They knew they were going to die, but they would die as warriors of Zephyria, defenders of the light. "All stations prepare for final engagement," she commanded. Her voice rang clear across the bridge, carrying the authority of 1,000 generations of military tradition. "We will buy time for the evacuation ships. Every second we hold is 1,000 more civilians reaching minimum safe distance." But even as her crew rushed to battle stations, Sylar's mind kept returning to the Keeper's words. Massive objects in the void between galaxies. What could exist in that emptiness? The Void Hunters had come from somewhere beyond known space, but these new readings suggested something else entirely. "Commander," Lieutenant Voss reported, "I'm detecting unusual quantum signatures from the gravitational anomalies. The patterns match theoretical models for dimensional breach technology, but the scale is beyond anything in our databases." Dimensional breaches? Such technology was purely theoretical. the stuff of scientific speculation and ancient myths. The old stories spoke of the architects, the first civilization to arise in Andromeda, who had supposedly mastered the ability to fold space itself. But they had vanished millions of years ago, leaving only ruins and mysteries. "Sir, we're being hailed," Tarek announced, his synthetic voice modulated with surprise. "The signal is coming from the void, from the direction of the gravitational anomalies. It's using a communication protocol I've never seen before, but our systems are somehow able to decode it." Siler straightened in her command chair. "Put it through." The bridge fell silent as a voice filled the air. It spoke in perfect Zephyrian, but with an accent that seemed both ancient and utterly alien. "Coalition forces, this is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Exodus Fleet. We have been monitoring your situation. Hold your position. Help is coming, Terran." The word meant nothing in any language Siler knew, but there was something in that voice, a confidence that cut through the despair that had gripped her hearts. "This is Commander Siler of the Zephyrian Empire," she responded. "Identify your species and state your intentions. We are currently engaged with hostile forces that have resisted every weapon and tactic we possess." There was a pause. Then the voice replied with quiet intensity. "We are humanity, Commander. We left our galaxy 30,000 years ago when we detected the first signs of the Void Hunter expansion. We didn't run to hide. We went into the darkness between galaxies to become something they wouldn't expect. We've been preparing for this day ever since." The tactical display suddenly exploded with new contacts. Ships were emerging from fold space at the edge of the star system, but these vessels were unlike anything in Sylar's experience. They seemed to ripple and flow like liquid metal, their hulls covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy signatures spiked off the charts as more and more ships materialized from the void. "Commander," Voss whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I'm counting over 10,000 vessels and more arriving every second. Their technology readings are impossible. They're using controlled singularities for power generation, and their hull composition appears to be some kind of programmable matter." Siler watched as the first human ships engaged the Void Hunter Vanguard. What happened next defied everything she thought she knew about space combat. The human vessels didn't just fight. They danced through space, their forms shifting and adapting in real time. Weapons that had proven useless against Void Hunter armor suddenly found purchase, tearing through enemy ships as if they were made of paper. Admiral Chen's voice returned, carrying a weight of history and purpose. "Commander Siler, we've been watching your empire and others like it for millennia. You've held the light against the darkness longer than most. Now it's time for humanity to honor an ancient promise. We're coming home, and we're bringing the fight the Void Hunters never expected." As Siler watched human ships pour into the system by the thousands, she felt something she thought she'd never experience again. Hope. Pure, brilliant hope burning in her chest like a newborn star. The Zephyrian Empire might be dying, but perhaps, just perhaps, the light itself would survive. The battle for Andromeda had taken a turn no one could have predicted. From the void between galaxies, from the darkness itself, salvation was emerging in the form of a species that had transformed itself into living weapons. Humanity had returned, and with them came the promise that the Void Hunter's reign of terror might finally end. Echoes from the darkness, Ambassador Kree floated through the ruins of the Celestial Archive, her tentacled form navigating the debris with practiced grace. The Void Hunters had passed through this system 6 months ago, leaving behind only the skeleton of what had once been the greatest library in 3 star systems. Yet something had drawn her here, a signal hidden beneath layers of quantum static that suggested not everything had been destroyed. Her species, the Aquari, had evolved in the deep oceans of their homeworld before taking to the stars. They could sense patterns and currents that others missed, whether in water or in the streams of data that flowed through space. Right now, every sense she possessed told her something important remained hidden in these ruins. The archive's emergency power still functioned in one section, casting eerie blue light through the twisted metal corridors. Kree moved toward it, her chromatophores shifting to match the shadows around her. An instinctive camouflage response to danger. She found what she was looking for in the deepest vault, a chamber that had somehow survived the Void Hunter assault. Ancient data crystals lined the walls, their surfaces etched with symbols that predated even the Zephyrian Empire. These were artifacts from the time of the architects, the mysterious first civilization that had vanished eons ago. but one crystal pulsed with active energy, displaying a holographic message that had been playing on repeat for who knew how long. The figure in the recording was unlike any species Kree knew. Bipedal, with smooth skin and forward-facing eyes, it spoke in a language that her translator struggled to decode. When the words finally came through, they sent a chill through her aqueous form. To those who find this message, know that we failed to stop them in time. The Void Hunters are not invaders. They are harvesters, created by a civilization that died long before memory. They will consume everything unless stopped by those willing to pay the ultimate price. We go now into the dark between stars, to become what we must become. When the darkness seems complete, look for us in the void. We will return when we are needed most. This is the promise of Earth. This is the vow of humanity. Earth? Humanity? The words meant nothing to Kree, but she recognized the star charts that appeared next. They showed regions beyond the galactic rim, in the empty spaces where nothing should exist. Yet the charts marked specific coordinates, dozens of them, scattered through the void like seeds waiting to sprout. Her communicator crackled to life, interrupting her discovery. Ambassador Kree, this is Coalition Command. Priority alert. The Void Hunters have broken through the Meridian defense line. All diplomatic personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately. She ignored the message, her attention fixed on the data crystal. Her tentacles danced over the ancient controls, downloading everything into her personal memory core. These coordinates, this message, they had to mean something. The recording spoke of returning when needed most, and if there was ever such a time, it was now. The Coalition War Council convened an emergency session aboard the mobile fortress Resilience, the last major command ship in their fleet. Representatives from 20 species attended, their forms rippling through holographic projections as they gathered from hidden locations across the galaxy. Kree materialized among them, still processing what she had discovered. The situation grows more desperate by the hour, announced General Thax of the Silicon Alliance. His crystalline form reflected the data streams flowing around him. We've lost contact with 60% of our remaining worlds. The Void Hunters are accelerating their harvest. At this rate, the galaxy will be completely consumed within 3 months. 3 months. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. After 5 years of war, they had 3 months before every trace of their civilizations was erased from existence. What about the Dimensional Weapon Project? Asked President Mora of the Crimson Republic. Her scales had dulled to almost black, a sign of extreme stress among her reptilian species. Dr. Zeke, the Coalition's chief scientist, materialized in the center of the gathering. His mechanical form, a merger of 12 different species technologies, hummed with barely contained energy. The weapon is theoretical at best. We would need energy equivalent to a supernova to create a dimensional rift large enough to trap the Void Hunter fleet. We simply don't have the resources. Kree pulsed for attention, her bioluminescent patches creating patterns that commanded silence. I've found something. Evidence of another civilization, one that faced the Void Hunters before us and chose a different path. She shared the recording and the star charts, watching as the assembled leaders processed this new information. The reactions ranged from skepticism to desperate hope. These coordinates are in dead space, observed Admiral Yen of the Star Rangers. Nothing could survive out there. No stars, no planets, just the void. Unless, Kree responded, someone found a way to make the void itself their home. The message spoke of becoming something new, something the Void Hunters wouldn't expect. What if this humanity didn't just hide? What if they evolved? The debate that followed was heated but short. They had nothing left to lose. General Thax summarized what they all knew to be true. We can die fighting with what we have. Or we can send a signal to these coordinates and hope that someone is listening. I vote for hope. The vote was unanimous. Within hours, the most powerful transmission arrays still under Coalition control were aligned toward the coordinates from the ancient message. They broadcast on every frequency and every language a single desperate plea for help. The response came faster than anyone expected. Not as a transmission, but as a gravitational wave that rippled through space-time itself. Sensors across the Coalition detected massive objects moving in the void, accelerating toward the galaxy at speeds that defied conventional physics. Then came the voice, broadcast directly into the quantum consciousness of every sentient being in the Coalition. Deep, resonant, and carrying the weight of millennia, it spoke in perfect synchronization across all languages. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Exodus Fleet. We hear your call. We remember our promise. The children of Earth return to settle an old debt. Hold fast. The cavalry is coming. As if responding to these words, Void Hunter formations across the galaxy suddenly shifted their patterns. For the first time in 5 years of war, the enemy showed something that might have been surprise. Their harvest ships began consolidating, pulling back from extended positions to form defensive clusters. They know something we don't. General Thax observed, his crystalline form brightening with what might have been hope. The Void Hunters are reacting to this threat. They recognize it. On the edge of sensor range, space itself began to tear open. Not the violent ruptures the Coalition had theorized about, but smooth, controlled openings that spoke of mastery over dimensional physics. Ships began emerging, but these were unlike anything in their databases. The vessels seemed to exist partially outside normal space, their hulls shifting between solid matter and energy states. They moved in perfect formation, thousands upon thousands of them, each one bearing the same geometric patterns that had been etched on the ancient data crystal. Ambassador Kree felt her consciousness expand as one of the human ships established direct neural contact. Images flooded her mind. Earth, a blue-green world in a distant galaxy, humanity's first contact with Void Hunter probes, the desperate decision to evacuate not just their world but their entire galaxy. 30,000 years of evolution in the dark spaces between stars, transforming themselves from organic beings into something that existed between dimensions. We didn't abandon the galaxy to its fate. The voice of Admiral Chen resonated in her mind. We left to become the weapon that could stop them. Every generation born in the void was shaped for this purpose. We are no longer purely human, but we remember what we fight for. The light of civilization, the hope of countless species, the dream that life can flourish among the stars. The first engagement between human and Void Hunter forces began in the Terminus system. Kree watched through sensor feeds as humanity's transformed fleet demonstrated why the Void Hunters had reacted with such apparent concern. Human ships phased in and out of reality, striking from dimensions the Void Hunters couldn't access. Weapons that manipulated fundamental forces tore through adaptive armor that had been considered invulnerable. But more than their technology, it was their tactics that astounded the Coalition observers. The humans fought with a coordination that surpassed even the hive minds of the galaxy. They moved as a single organism with millions of independent parts, each ship knowing exactly where to be and when to strike. The Void Hunters are pulling back, reported General Thax, his voice filled with disbelief. They're actually retreating from the Terminus system. For the first time in 5 years, the Coalition had witnessed the Void Hunters retreat. But Ambassador Kree, still linked to the human fleet's consciousness, understood this was just the beginning. The real battle, the one that would determine the fate of not just their galaxy but countless others, was yet to come. The silent return captain Marcus Chen existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously as his consciousness merged with the UTS Prometheus, humanity's flagship. His physical body, what remained of it after 30,000 years of evolution, floated in a biomechanical pod at the ship's core. But his mind spanned the entire vessel, feeling every system as if it were part of his own nervous system. Around him, 10,000 other human ships emerged from fold space at the galaxy's edge. Each vessel was a living entity, a fusion of human consciousness and technology that had been perfected over millennia in the void. They moved with an organic fluidity that made traditional fleet movements look primitive by comparison. Through the quantum link, Marcus felt the presence of every ship captain in the fleet. Their thoughts merged and separated like waves in an ocean, maintaining individual identity while sharing collective purpose. Among them was Captain Sarah Mitchell aboard the UTS Horizon, her consciousness particularly bright in the neural network. The Void Hunters are consolidating their forces in the Nexus cluster. Sarah's thoughts rippled through the link. Preliminary scans show over 100,000 vessels. They're adapting their formations to counter our dimensional phasing capability. Marcus expected this. The Void Hunters' greatest strength was their ability to adapt, to learn from every encounter and evolve counters to any threat. But humanity had spent 30 millennia preparing for exactly this challenge. All ships initiate Protocol 7, Marcus commanded through the neural link. We're going to show them what we learned in the dark. The human fleet began to change. Ships that had appeared solid suddenly became translucent, existing partially in multiple dimensions at once. Their weapon systems reconfigured at the molecular level, adapting to counter the Void Hunter's latest defensive modifications. This was humanity's answer to the enemy's adaptability, become something that changed faster than they could respond to. The first major engagement erupted in the stellar graveyard, a region where the Void Hunters had already harvested 12 star systems. Marcus felt every moment of the battle through his ship's sensors. Human vessels danced between dimensions, striking from angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Void Hunter ships that had been invulnerable to Coalition weapons crumbled under assaults that targeted their molecular bonds directly. But the enemy adapted quickly. Within minutes, Void Hunter vessels began generating dimensional shields, blocking the phase attacks that had been so effective. Their weapons recalibrated, firing trans-dimensional pulses that could hit human ships regardless of what plane of existence they occupied. Marcus felt the first casualties through the neural link. The UTS Vanguard, with its crew of 3,000 merged consciousnesses, went dark as a Void Hunter weapon tore through its quantum core. The death rippled through the fleet's shared consciousness like a scream of pain. Each loss was felt by all, the price of their deep integration. Their learning too fast came a thought from Captain Rodriguez aboard the UTS Phoenix. We need to implement the Cascade Protocol. The Cascade Protocol was their most desperate strategy, one that would cost them dearly. It involved deliberately sacrificing ships in specific patterns to create quantum instabilities that would destabilize entire regions of space. The Void Hunters wouldn't be able to adapt to chaos itself. Do it, Marcus commanded, though the order felt like condemning parts of himself to death. Across the battlefield, human ships began deliberate suicide runs, but these weren't simple ramming attacks. As each ship died, it released carefully controlled quantum cascades that turned spacetime into a storm of probability. Void Hunter vessels caught in these zones found their own adaptive systems turning against them. Evolution running backwards, order dissolving into entropy. The Coalition fleet, watching from safe distance, could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Ambassador Kree, still maintaining a tentative link with the human command network, felt overwhelmed by the combination of triumph and grief flowing through humanity's shared consciousness. Through her connection, she sensed something else. The human fleet wasn't just fighting in normal space. They were engaging the Void Hunters across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Battles raged in planes of existence that her species couldn't even perceive, each one as fierce as what they could observe. Coalition vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Marcus broadcast on standard frequencies. We need you to implement holding patterns at these coordinates. You're going to be our anchor points. Anchor points for what? General Thax responded. For pulling the Void Hunters into a dimensional trap. We can't destroy them all through conventional means, even with our advantages. But we can strand them in dimensions where they can't function. The plan was audacious beyond measure. The human fleet would create a series of dimensional rifts, using the Coalition ships as stable reference points in normal space. The rifts would pull the Void Hunter fleet into pocket dimensions where the laws of physics could be rewritten. But Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through the neural link with urgency. Marcus, I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the Void Hunter command cluster. They're preparing to open their own dimensional breach. If they succeed, they could bring in reinforcements from their origin point. The origin point, the source of all Void Hunters, hidden somewhere in a dimension beyond normal space-time. If they opened a stable connection to it, the invasion would never end. New Void Hunters would pour through in infinite numbers. Marcus made a decision that he knew would define humanity's legacy. Sarah, take your battle group and seal that breach, whatever the cost. He felt her acknowledgement through the link, tinged with the understanding that this was likely a one-way mission. Her battle group, 500 ships with nearly 1 million merged consciousnesses, peeled away from the main fleet and accelerated toward the forming breach. The space around the Void Hunter command cluster was a maelstrom of exotic energies. Reality itself was breaking down as the enemy prepared to punch a hole through to their origin dimension. Sarah's ships dove into this chaos without hesitation, their forms shifting to survive energies that would have instantly destroyed normal matter. We're approaching the breach point, Sarah transmitted, beginning dimensional collapse protocol. Her ships arranged themselves in a complex pattern around the forming breach. Each vessel became a node in a vast geometric structure that existed across multiple dimensions. Together, they began to generate their own dimensional field, one designed to collapse the breach rather than stabilize it. The Void Hunters responded instantly. Thousands of their ships converged on Sarah's position, pouring devastating fire into her formation. Human vessels died by the dozens, their consciousnesses screaming across the neural link as they were torn from existence. But they held their positions. Even as ships died, others moved to take their places, maintaining the geometric pattern that was slowly crushing the dimensional breach. Sarah felt herself spreading thinner, her consciousness jumping between ships as her original vessel took critical damage. "The breach is collapsing," she reported, her mental voice growing faint. "But we need more power. We need to burn out our cores." Marcus understood what she was asking. Burning out their quantum cores would release enough energy to seal the breach permanently. But it would also mean the complete annihilation of every ship and consciousness in her battle group. "You have authorization," he sent back, the words heavy with the weight of 1,000,000 deaths. Through the neural link, the entire human fleet felt Sarah's last moments. Her consciousness expanded one final time, touching every mind in her battle group, sharing a moment of perfect unity before the end. Then, in a blaze of light that could be seen across the galaxy, 500 ships detonated their cores simultaneously. The explosion didn't just destroy ships. It shattered the boundary between dimensions, creating a scar in spacetime that sealed the breach completely. The Void Hunters' connection to their origin point was severed, cutting them off from reinforcements forever. In the aftermath, Marcus felt the profound silence in the neural network where Sarah and her 1,000,000 souls had been, but their sacrifice had worked. The Void Hunters were now finite, limited to the forces already in the galaxy. They could be defeated. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. Human ships pressed their advantage, driving the Void Hunters back system by system. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable was finally on the defensive, their adaptive capabilities overwhelmed by humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. The price of evolution, the medical bay aboard the Coalition flagship Resilience, had been converted into something unprecedented. A joint human coalition research facility. Dr. Zeke worked alongside the human scientist who called herself Dr. Lisa Park, though he understood that was merely a translation of something far more complex. Lisa's physical form was unsettling to observe. She appeared humanoid but seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, occasionally flickering between dimensions like a living quantum uncertainty. Her consciousness, she had explained, was distributed across 12 different bodies throughout the fleet, all sharing the same mind. "You want to share our evolution with the Coalition," she said, her voice harmonizing with itself as multiple versions spoke in unison. "But you need to understand the cost. We gave up more than our physical forms. We gave up the ability to exist purely in normal space. We became living weapons, and there's no going back." Zeke's mechanical form hummed as he processed the biological data from the human volunteers. Their DNA, if it could still be called that, was a fusion of organic molecules and quantum structures. Every cell was both alive and not alive, existing in superposition until observed. "Show me the neural integration process," he requested. Lisa gestured to a containment field where a volunteer human soldier was demonstrating the merge with their ship. The soldier's body dissolved into streams of consciousness that flowed through quantum conduits into the vessel's biomechanical core. Within moments, the ship itself became an extension of the soldier's will. "The integration is permanent after the first deep merge," Lisa explained. "The human and ship become one entity. When the ship is destroyed, the human consciousness is torn apart across multiple dimensions. It's the most painful death imaginable, experienced simultaneously in every plane of existence. Yet your people accept this willingly." Lisa's form solidified as she focused on a single dimension to answer. "We had 30,000 years to come to terms with it. Each generation born in the void was more integrated than the last. What you see as sacrifice, we see as evolution. We became what the galaxy needed us to become." Meanwhile, in the command center, Marcus Chen stood in holographic form before the Coalition War Council. His image flickered between dimensions, sometimes appearing as a young man, sometimes as an ancient being whose eyes held the weight of millennia. "The Void Hunters are regrouping in the Dark Nebula," he reported. "Our intelligence suggests they're attempting to create a new type of harvester, one that can counter our dimensional capabilities. We need to strike before they complete it. General Thax's crystalline form pulsed with concern. Your fleet has already lost 30% of its ships. Each loss costs you thousands of consciousnesses. How much more can humanity sacrifice? Marcus's expression was unreadable, his face shifting between emotional states from different dimensional perspectives. We knew the price when we returned. Every human in the void made this choice. We transformed ourselves into living weapons because we understood that some threats require ultimate solutions. Ambassador Kree, who had maintained the strongest connection to the human neural network, suddenly gasped. Her tentacles writhed as images flooded her consciousness. She saw the void between galaxies where humanity had lived for 30 millennia, vast structures that existed outside normal space, powered by the energy of collapsing pocket universes. Cities where children were born already integrated with technology, their first thoughts shared across neural networks spanning light years. You gave up childhood, she whispered. Your offspring are born as soldiers. Marcus turned to her, and for a moment his form fully solidified. We gave up innocence. Our children know from birth what they are and why they exist. They grow up feeling the deaths of our warriors across the neural link. They understand sacrifice before they understand play. It's horrible. It's necessary. The discussion was interrupted by urgent alarms. New contacts were appearing throughout the galaxy, but these weren't void hunters. They were human ships different from the military fleet. Smaller, faster, and radiating energy signatures that defied classification. These are our seeders, Lisa announced, appearing in the command center. If we fall here, they will scatter across the universe, carrying our genetic templates and consciousness archives. Humanity will survive somewhere in some form. You're planning for defeat? General Thax asked. We're being realistic, Marcus replied. The main Void Hunter fleet still outnumbers us 3-1. Even with our advantages, victory isn't certain. But we can ensure that someone, somewhere, remembers this fight and learns from it. The next phase of the battle began in the Dark Nebula. The Void Hunters had indeed created something new. Ships that existed in a state of constant dimensional flux, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons or dimensional attacks. They swarmed out of the nebula in waves, each one adapting to human tactics in real time. Marcus merged completely with his flagship, his consciousness expanding to coordinate the entire human fleet as a single entity. Through the neural link, he felt every ship, every consciousness, every death. The battle became a dance of sacrifice and adaptation, each side evolving new tactics moment by moment. Captain Torres, commanding the UTS Eternity, discovered that the new Void Hunter ships had a weakness. They couldn't maintain their dimensional flux while firing weapons. The window was tiny, microseconds at most, but it was enough. Human ships began timing their attacks to these brief moments of vulnerability, paying for each successful strike with dozens of their own vessels. In the midst of the battle, something unexpected happened. A group of coalition ships led by Ambassador Kree's vessel entered the fray. They had modified their systems using knowledge gleaned from human technology, creating hybrid weapons that could affect targets across multiple dimensions. We stand with you. Kree transmitted through the neural link she had learned to navigate. If this is the end, we choose to face it as one. The combined fleet pressed into the Dark Nebula, driving toward the massive construct at its heart. The Void Hunters had built something that resembled a mechanical planet, a harvester so large it could consume entire star systems in hours. It was protected by the bulk of their remaining fleet, a wall of adaptive armor and devastating weapons. Marcus knew what had to be done. The construct had to be destroyed, but approaching it meant certain death for any ship that tried. The Void Hunters had learned too much, adapted too completely. Only one strategy remained. All ships prepare for Convergence Protocol, he commanded. The Convergence Protocol was humanity's final contingency. Every remaining human ship would merge their consciousnesses into a single entity, creating a gestalt mind of such complexity that it could rewrite local reality. But the process would burn out every human consciousness in the fleet, leaving nothing but empty shells. You'll die, all of you. General Thax protested when he understood what was happening. We'll transcend, Marcus corrected. For a few moments, we'll become something beyond human, beyond physical existence, long enough to end this threat forever. The merging began. Across the battlefield, human ships drew together, their consciousnesses flowing into a single point of infinite complexity. Marcus felt himself dissolving, his individual identity becoming just one note in a symphony of a billion minds. Sarah Mitchell's preserved consciousness archived in the fleet's quantum cores joined the merger, adding her strength to theirs. The entity that formed was beyond description. It existed in all dimensions simultaneously, its consciousness spanning from the quantum foam to the cosmic web. For a brief moment it understood everything: the origin of the Void Hunters, the purpose of their harvest, the cycles of creation and destruction that governed the universe. With this understanding came power. The entity reached out and touched the Void Hunter construct, not attacking it but unmaking it. The molecular bonds dissolved. The quantum structures collapsed. The very concept of its existence was edited from reality. The Void Hunter fleet, suddenly without their central command, fell into chaos. But the entity couldn't maintain cohesion. The energy required was consuming every human consciousness in the merger. One by one, the lights of individual minds went dark, their essence scattered across dimensions. Marcus felt himself fragmenting, his consciousness spreading thinner until only a whisper remained. In his final moment, he sent one last transmission to the Coalition fleet. Remember us. Remember what we became. The path is open for you to follow if you have the courage. When darkness yields to dawn, 6 months had passed since the convergence. Ambassador Kree stood in the memorial chamber aboard the new Coalition human hybrid station, orbiting where the dark nebula had been. The walls were covered with names, millions of them, each one a human consciousness that had sacrificed itself in the final battle. But the memorial wasn't just for remembrance. It was active, humming with quantum energy that suggested something extraordinary. Dr. Zeke worked at a console nearby, his mechanical form integrated with human technology they were still learning to understand. The consciousness seeds are still viable, he announced, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and reverence. The humans didn't just die. They dispersed into quantum foam, but the patterns remain. With enough energy and the right technology, we might be able to reconstitute some of them. Kree's chromatophores shifted to patterns of hope. She had felt the humans die through the neural link, experienced their dissolution into fundamental forces. But perhaps death wasn't as final as they had believed, not for beings who had learned to exist across dimensions. The Coalition had changed dramatically since the victory. Without the immediate threat of the Void Hunters, species that had been united by desperation were learning to work together by choice. Human technology, what they could understand of it, was being slowly integrated into Coalition systems. Ships were being retrofitted with dimensional drives, weapons were being enhanced with quantum manipulators, and a new generation was being trained in neural integration techniques. But the most significant change was in the void itself. The empty spaces between galaxies were no longer silent. Strange signals emanated from the darkness, patterns that suggested the human seeders had found something out there, or perhaps something had found them. General Thax entered the memorial chamber, his crystalline form now incorporating human quantum structures that allowed him to exist partially in multiple dimensions. The transformation had been voluntary but irreversible. Like the humans before them, the Coalition species were beginning to evolve beyond their original forms. "We've received a transmission," he announced, "from the Andromeda galaxy. The Void Hunter remnants there have gone dormant. Whatever the humans did in the convergence, it affected their entire network across multiple galaxies." Kree touched one of the names on the wall, Sarah Mitchell. Through her connection to the human neural network remnants, she sometimes felt whispers of consciousness, like echoes of the departed. Sarah's presence was particularly strong, as if her sacrifice had imprinted itself on the fabric of space-time. "They're not entirely gone," Kree said softly. "I can feel them sometimes in the quantum fluctuations. They became part of the universe itself. Guardian spirits in the dark between stars." Zeke's instrument suddenly spiked with activity. Something's happening. Massive energy buildup in the quantum foam. It centered on the memorial, the chamber filled with light that existed in spectrums beyond normal vision. The names on the walls began to glow, resonating with harmonics that touched every dimension simultaneously. Through her neural link, Kree felt a familiar presence growing stronger. Marcus Chen's voice, or something like it, whispered through the quantum static. We never left. We just changed. The convergence didn't destroy us. It transformed us into something that could exist permanently between dimensions. The light coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form, translucent and shifting, but unmistakably present. Other forms began to appear, thousands of them, each one a human consciousness that had learned to exist as pure information in the quantum foam. Marcus's form stabilized enough to communicate directly. The Void Hunters were just the first test. There are other threats out there, older and more dangerous. We've become the galaxy's immune system, antibodies against forces that would destroy all life. We can't return to physical form, but we can guide, protect, and when necessary, intervene. You're ghosts, General Thax observed, his tone carrying wonder rather than fear. We're evolution, Marcus corrected. This is what awaits all species that survive long enough, the transition from physical to quantum existence. The Coalition stands at the threshold. You can choose to follow our path or forge your own. But know that the universe is vast, dangerous, and full of wonders you haven't imagined. Ambassador Kree felt the weight of choice settling on her species and all the others. They could remain as they were, physical beings limited to normal space, or they could follow humanity's example, transforming themselves into something that could face whatever threats emerged from the darkness. How do we begin? She asked. The ghost of Marcus Chen seemed to smile, an expression that rippled across dimensions. You've already begun. Every neural link established, every consciousness merged with technology, every step beyond your original limitations. Evolution isn't a destination. It's a journey. We'll be here to guide you, the silent guardians in the void. Over the following years, the Coalition underwent its own transformation. Not all at once, not all the same way, but steadily, inevitably. Some species chose partial integration, maintaining physical forms while expanding their consciousness across dimensions. Others followed humanity's path completely, dissolving into quantum existence to join the growing network of guardian spirits. The galaxy rebuilt, but it was different now. Cities floated partially in normal space and partially in other dimensions. Ships flew on routes that curved through folded space-time. Children were born with neural implants that let them touch the quantum foam from birth, learning to think in ways their parents never could. And in the darkness between galaxies, between dimensions, between the very atoms of existence, humanity watched and waited. They had become exactly what they had promised, eternal guardians, the sword and shield against the darkness. When new threats emerged from distant galaxies or alien dimensions, they were there, formless warriors fighting battles that physical beings couldn't even perceive. The Void Hunters had been defeated, but they had served their purpose in the cosmic design. They had forced life to evolve, to transcend its limitations, to become something greater. The war had ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. Ambassador Kree, now existing as both physical being and quantum consciousness, often stood at the edge of known space, looking out into the void. She could sense them out there, millions of human souls and a growing number of coalition spirits, dancing between dimensions like living stars. The darkness no longer held fear. It held promise. For in learning to fight the darkness, life had learned to become light itself, eternal and unquenchable, spreading through the universe in forms that matter had never taken before. The war was over. Evolution had just begun. In the deepest void, where no star shone and no matter existed, Sarah Mitchell's consciousness danced with a million others, their thoughts creating constellations of pure information. They had lost their bodies but gained the universe. They had sacrificed their humanity, but became something humanity had always dreamed of being. Immortal, omnipresent, and forever standing guard against the darkness. When hope had vanished, humanity had emerged from the void not as conquerors but as transcendence itself. And in their sacrifice they had shown every species in the universe the same path to follow. The future stretched ahead, infinite and full of possibilities. And in every shadow, in every quiet moment between heartbeats, in every space between thoughts, humanity's evolved consciousness stood watch, ensuring that the light of life would never again come so close to extinction. The galaxy had been saved, but more importantly it had been transformed. And in that transformation lay the seed of something greater than anyone had imagined, the next stage of existence itself, where consciousness and cosmos became one, and life finally achieved its ultimate destiny among the stars. Join the battle, subscribe, like, and share to support Earth's resistance.